you're looking to dive into topics on how to live a happier, healthier, more fit, and long lifespan, then you've come to the right podcast. Livin the Dream with me, Coach Damian Evans. Together, we will explore the topics on all things health, fitness, and wellness. Together, we will be lifelong learners on this journey to living the ultimate dream. What up, Dream Team? Coach D here, coming at you from beautiful sunny San Diego, and welcome back to the Livin the Dream Podcast, where today we cover the topic of training to help you reach for your health, fitness, and wellness goals and in order for you to live your dream life. And today we are going to be going over 5 moves that you never want to lose, with a goal to teach you how to move your body better so that you feel better in your body today and every day in the future. We will cover these 5 different movements that you never want to lose. And if you've already lost the ability to do these movements, then I'm going to let you in on a few strategies that you can do beforehand in order to lead up to being able to do them again. These are really important because they represent fundamental movements of the human body that allow you to live your life in a way that feels easy and doesn't cause a lot of pain. Fundamental movements that everyone should be able to do for their entire life. So practice these moves frequently, at least every single week, if not every single day. Figure out a way to slide them into your daily life, and your body will be able to do all things that you want to do for as long as you want to do them. So let's dive into move number 1. Move number 1 is called the sit to stand. Now in the gym setting, you might call this a squat. But if we really break it down and think about it, this is probably fundamentally the most important movement that you can have, especially in a world set up for sitting on things. And it is a movement that you should maintain for as long as possible. It shouldn't just be a movement that you kind of have to grind your way through with aches and pains and injuries, and you have to assist yourself with your hands on your knees to get up. Instead, it should be something smooth that feels nice and fluid. Being able to stand up from a seated position might seem so simple, but it's super important for staying independent as we get older. And it's incredible how I see people in their 40s, 50s that are having a hard time doing this. Because if you don't use it, you will lose it. If you struggle with this, it almost certainly means that you're going to have trouble with everyday tasks like walking or climbing stairs as you age. And trouble with the sit to stand move also makes you more likely that you're going to have a fall when you get older. And we all know falls can lead to serious injuries like head traumas and hip fractures, which nobody wants. It's not just about moving though. Studies have found that folks who have a hard time with this sit to stand move tend to have more health issues overall, which can affect how they live. Trouble with this is linked to things like weak muscles, stiff joints, balance problems, and bone density issues. But the good news is you can work on these things with targeted exercises to stay stronger and more mobile as you age. In a nutshell, being able to do the sit to stand easily isn't just about convenience in your everyday life. It's literally a key indicator of how well you're aging and how independent you can stay. This is why I personally have made it a non-negotiable that anytime I get up off the floor, I do it without using my hands. And I've done it so long that I'm actually able to get up off the floor with one leg, a pistol squat. And I do that every single time because if I can do it now and I continue to do it tomorrow and I continue to do that until I'm 90 years old, I will for sure give myself a good shot at maintaining my overall independence. And yes, if I do decline, at least my baseline starting point is much, much higher than the average person right now. So it's so important that we continue to keep this sit to stand movement in our arsenal. So as you practice the sit to stand during your everyday life, make sure that you're doing it with intention and good form. Let's talk about how you can follow along with these cues to have good form. First, make sure that your knees are pointing in the same direction as your toes. One of the most common reasons I see people hurt themselves while doing a sit to stand is because their knees cave in as they stand up. This usually comes from tight inner thigh muscles, adductors, and weak or muscles that aren't able to connect to glutes. And so that brings your knees in, caving in, which is not in alignment with your toes. And you can probably see this sometimes when your legs get tired or if you have lost muscle strength. If this is you, this means that you probably have those weak hip rotators as you stand up, which are your glutes, your outside hip muscles. So do what I call spreading the floor. When you have your feet on the floor, you actually want to try to corkscrew your feet into the ground, trying to imagine that you're turning your toes outward, but your feet are not actually moving. You're corkscrewing your feet into the ground. And if you do this properly, especially when you're barefoot, you can actually see your foot creating a larger arch. You're actually creating an arch in the foot when you corkscrew your feet into the ground. Just make sure that you keep your big toe joint rooted down on the floor and a tripod-like weight distribution on the bottom of your foot. So think heavy in the heel, big toe rooted into the floor with also weight in your pinky toe. Also gently want to push your knees outward in line with your, I like to say pinky toes, but really it's over your middle toes. But if you say pinky toes, people usually get it lined up perfectly. And by doing this, you're going to activate those hip muscles as you stand up. And I sometimes will see people's eyes light up when I tell them to do this. They're like, oh, I actually feel it. You can tell when people connect to it. It's so very common for me to see a lot of people put their weight all the way up on the front of their feet, and the heels actually come off the ground. And then they will bring their knees in front of their toes, which isn't necessarily bad. Now, if you're really strong and you have really healthy knees and you've strengthened that position and you've been able to get enough stress and stimulus into those positions to be able to handle that position, then this is going to be fine. Most people cannot get themselves into this position. This is going to cause knee pain because you're really, really emphasizing the knee joint and you're asking that knee joint to be strong and mobile, and rather than moving from your hips. So if you have not earned the ability to get into that position, your body will tell you your tissues cannot handle the load that you're trying to put onto it. So then a signal of pain happens and people are like, oh, squatting hurts my knees. No, the ability to squat the way that you're trying to squat hurts your knees because you have not earned the right to get into that position. So if you do this rooting down type of strategy, you will use some of the biggest muscles in your body and you will take it out of that knee joint until you've gained the ability to then come up onto your toes and let your knees go over your toes. But it's so common for me to see this from people. So instead, think about bringing your weight from up onto your toes back into your heels, keeping that big toe rooted down. And I like to say push through the arch of your foot if you're really trying to use your glutes, the big muscles. You also want to bow or hinge forward from the hips. So you want to hinge from the hips. Like if you put your hands in the crease of your hips and you push straight back, like you're reaching for a chair behind you, that's a really, really good cue in order to keep the weight in the heels. You also want to keep the chest up, and then you're going to be having a more aligned position to come up from that squat. The final thing with the sit to stand movement is when you hinge forward, you want to make sure that you're not rounding at the lower back. And I see this all the time because if you round at the lower back and then let's say you have weight on your back or weight in your hands and you jerk up from that seated position to a standing position with your back rounded, well, if the load is on the tissue of your lower back and the tissue can't handle that load, then maybe you end up having low back pain or muscular pain or end up hurting a disc in your spine. That could definitely happen, or other common related issues when it comes to improper squatting form. You just want to make sure that you have a nice neutral spine until you've gained the strength and ability to have a more rounded posture. You'll see strongmen. Strongmen will lift up these huge stones that weigh hundreds and hundreds of pounds, and their back will be rounded as they grab this stone and wrap their arms around it. But that's because they've gotten into that position and they've strengthened that position. Rounding at the back isn't necessarily bad. It's just that most people that do it when they squat, they're someone that has a desk job. They sit for 6 hours a day, and Then they go into a gym setting, and 1 hour out of that day, they're doing a bunch of heavy back squats, and their spine is like, what? We've never been in this position, and we've never had load on this position. And now you're trying to do it in a high intensity performance type of situation. That's going to be a bad combination. So you want to make sure that you are keeping that neutral spine. You want to keep sure that the back is flat when you're doing things like squatting until you've earned the right to be able to have a more rounded spine. And you want to be able to scale this to where your capability is at right now. So not when you were at your strongest. Like, I know a lot of people that come into a group fitness setting for the first time of not working out after a while. They're like, oh yeah, I used to squat 135 pounds in high school. And then they try to do it after 20-year hiatus of back squatting. Like, that's not going to be a very good outcome. If you're completely unable to stand up without pain or without a ton of support, then the best move for us to do is to start with something called a static tension squat. And you can even do this in your office chair. No one will actually be able to tell what's happening or what you're doing. And it's a great way to start to bring a little bit of connection back to that muscle when you're sitting a lot. Essentially, it's trying to put as much weight into your legs as possible while you're seated, but you won't actually move. You won't actually stand. So if you're seated right now, you could probably do this. Place the weight on your heels, root through the big toe joint, and then all you're going to do from there is you're going to kind of drag your heels into the ground, and you're going to push your feet into the floor, and you're going to squeeze your legs and make sure your knees are in line with your toes, and see if you can feel your glutes muscles squeezing. Hold and intensify or activate all those leg muscles for just a few seconds, and then relax for a minute. And then you're going to repeat that by pressing down into your heels, holding for a few seconds, followed by a recovery period. And this is just like doing reps of squats, but you're doing something called an isometric or a static hold, a static rep. You can repeat this 10 times or so with the goal of trying to build a better mind-muscle connection to all the muscles of the legs. And then you can start conditioning those muscles to be able to support your body weight. And it also helps your nervous system be able to fire those muscles more effectively. So that's kind of like the beginner step that you can do if you're unable to even stand up from a chair right now on your own. Now, another step that you can do is that you can place your hands on top of your knees, on top of your thighs, and if you have something around that you can grab, like the back of another chair, or if you are in a gym setting, you can use a TRX strap that you can hold on to. This is a great way to assist yourself. It's like if you want to get into a pull-up, but you don't have the strength to do a pull-up, well, then you use a band that's going to help assist you up. You can do the same thing with your squats. And I see a lot of people wanting to skip this step, and it's because the ego says that I should be able to do this. I've been able to do this, but when you don't use it, you lose it. And that general decline that happens over time, it sneaks up on people. So try to take the ego out of it. Try to go as slowly as possible. A lot of people try to use momentum when they're getting out of their chair. They'll like rock forward and back and then try to get out of the chair with momentum. See if you can get out of a chair as slowly as possible, owning every single centimeter, every single inch of that movement. And if you're unable to, then you know that you have some work to do. And it starts with body weight assisted, helping yourself up. And then it goes into body weight. Then maybe you grab a light kettlebell or something that's maybe 5 or 10 pounds, and you have it at your chest. And then you start to progressively overload that movement. That is going to be really, really important for us as we get older. So I want you to think about every time you sit down, every time you stand up, you want to make sure that you are consciously thinking about how you do this movement. You want to think about, I'm using the muscle strength, not momentum. I'm not using my assistance with my arms. I want to make sure that I get to a point where I can stand up easily by myself, and especially not just from that 90-degree angle. So we think about the chairs in our everyday life where our hips are at 90 degrees and our hips don't go below our knee joint. If you can eventually get to a point where you can have your hips lower than your knee joint, you know that you're on the right track right there. You have to practice these movements ideally every single day. Every time that you get up from a seated position and you get down into a seated position, it's a controlled squat. And if you do it every single day, multiple times a day, this will be just as effective as if you do a 1 hour squat session 3 times a week. So just try to be a little bit more mindful about how you move in your everyday life and make sure that you keep the sit to stand in your arsenal as long as possible. Okay, let's move on to number 2. Number 1, the sit to stand. Number 2 is the reverse lunge, another lower body movement. This is the ability to step backwards, drop your knee all the way down to the ground without actually touching the floor, and then standing back up all the way back to a standing position that feels pain-free. And it's funny because I'll tell people to do a lunge in group fitness, and stepping backwards, even just the act of stepping backwards, does not feel natural and does not feel safe for a lot of people. The reverse lunge is really important because it strengthens all the muscles that we need to have strong for doing things like walking up a hill or going up a flight of stairs. So your goal is to maintain the reverse lunge for as long as you possibly can. There are some key things to having good form that are similar to the sit to stand that we just talked about. First is that you want, as you take a step back, your foot on the ground, you want to make sure that you're not on a balance beam. So you're taking a big step back, but you want to make sure that your feet aren't lined up with one another. That will cause balance issues. And I like to tell people when they're doing this movement, you should have your feet on train tracks. So if your feet are hip width apart, you have a pair of train tracks that your feet slide back and forward on. Or like if your feet were on a pair of skis, you're going to simply slide your feet straight back and forth. So if I looked at you from the front, I would still see space between the knees and the feet, hip width apart. Super important. The next key is as we step our foot backwards, we want to make sure that we think about maintaining the majority of the pressure on our front foot. Most people, they take a big step back and they put all their weight on their back leg. And what this does is this puts a lot of pressure on the back knee. And if your knee is not used to that pressure and it hasn't earned the right to support that weight and that load, what's going to happen? There's a lot of people that say, lunges hurt my knees. I used to be one of those people. And it's not the knee's fault. The knees are the middleman between the ankles and the hips. That would be like saying if you had never back squatted more than, let's say, 45 pounds, and then you put 500 pounds on your back. Of course, that's not going to feel great. But if you're able to keep the majority of the weight on your front foot and your front leg, then you can start to focus on really important fundamental movement of stepping through that front leg, which is kind of like a single leg squat. It's essentially the same movement as walking up a hill or climbing up a set of stairs. In this movement, our goal is to strengthen the ability to, yes, hinge from the hips and stand back up from a kneeling position. Like if you were in a kneeling position, to stand back up. That's so important. I see a lot of seniors that I train that when I get them down onto the floor, they have a super hard time getting back up. It takes 45 different points of contact in order for them to slowly grind their way back up. But if they're able to go from on the floor into a kneeling position and then stand up, which is just the second part of a lunge, you know that these people are going to be strong enough to do all the things that they need to do in their daily lives. So in a lunge, as you step back, it's okay to bow or hinge from your hips, similar to what we call an RDL, a Romanian deadlift, or a good morning exercise. And if you quickly YouTube RDL or good morning, you can see some pretty great exercises that help to strengthen the back of your legs, your hamstrings, the back of your thighs, your glutes. Once you've stepped back and you've hinged forward, then you want to press your weight into your front heel. Just like you're coming up out of a squat, you want the weight on your heel, you want the big toe rooted into the ground, pushing through the arch of your foot, tripod of weight on your foot. Fire those hip muscles to get you back to a standing position. Also, just like we did in the sit to stand, it's important to make sure that your knee is going in the same direction of your toe because it's going to want to cave in most likely. If your knee is not aligned properly, that could be another incident where you could manifest as knee pain. And it's a warning from your body that this movement just isn't right. You're not performing this movement correctly. And once your knee is aligned in the same direction as your toes, you just want to corkscrew that front foot into the ground. Your back foot is kind of like a kickstand or a supporting limb on the ground, but you want most of the weight in the front leg, especially if you're targeting that front hip. So I see dozens of people when they are weak at this movement, they just stop doing reverse lunges and they say, I can't do lunges. Give me an option for a lunge. I don't want to do lunges because for some it might hurt their knees, others it might hurt their back. Some they just don't have the leg strength, so they just don't want to do it. And it's very common for those that I coach that are in their 60s to never do a lunge ever again. But that doesn't have to be you. That doesn't have to be you forever. If you are breathing and you can move your body, you can earn your way to be able to do this again. I promise you. Start small, start slow, meet yourself where you're currently at with the best possible form, do what you can do, and find the right modification that you can practice. And over time, consistently, frequently practicing this, you can progress to a modification of any level that matches your consistency and the discipline that you bring to practicing this movement. And okay, let's say you can't do a lunge right now. You can do a backward step reverse lunge by taking a chair in front of you and holding onto that chair for support. And if you can't do that, then just go halfway down. And if we still can't do that, then just take a step backwards and then try to see if you can do that static, isometric tension squeeze where you're taking a step back, squeezing every muscle in the legs and the lower body, and then coming back into a standing position. We're starting to feel what it feels like to train our hip into what's called hip extension, which we rarely do in our everyday life. One of my favorite mobility gurus, I think they might have even came up with the word mobility, is Kelly Starrett. Kelly Starrett is fantastic. He was known in the CrossFit world for helping people get out of pain and work on their mobility to be able to then be very high performers. And he says that he wants to normalize hip extension. How often do you get your knee behind your hips? Which is, it's exactly what a lunge is. I have a lot of people that I train that have desk jobs, and I tell them, you know what? Instead of having your knees at 90 degrees in a seated position, you're still at your desk. Take the chair away. Put a nice, comfy, big cushiony pillow on the floor and put your knee down on the floor. And now you're in this kneeling position, and at least you can get your hips slightly in front of that back knee, and your body will tell you when it wants to change position that it needs to have a little bit of movement. And that way, now my hip is an extension. I get to move my body a little bit. Now I can still stay at my desk, but I'm not in the same position that I'm in all day long, anywhere, driving in a car, sitting on the couch, sitting on the toilet, all those things. Focusing one side at a time, get a good stretch on the back of your thigh, and then switching sides. You have to practice the reverse lunge. Ideally every single day. Find times in your day where you can kneel down, pick something off the floor, bending over, hinging from the hips, and getting that move back to your feet. Sneak these movements into your everyday life. Frequency is king here. It'll strengthen that reverse lunge, and you'll be able to do things like go up hills, stairs, all of those things effectively and easily in a way that feels good and that is pain-free. Let's move on to move number 3. Move number 2 is the reverse lunge. Move number 3 is the plank. That's right. The plank is essential because it's teaching you how to hold your entire body in a rigid, stable position. Or in trainer speak, if you've heard this before, stabilize your core, which means you have to have a nice, strong foundation / midsection. Everything you do stems from your core, your midsection, your torso. There are a few things that people do when they perform planks that are, let's say, suboptimal. One thing is that when people are in like a high plank, a push-up position with their hands on the floor, they actually tend to push their hands up and away from them, using their shoulders and their traps to maintain this position. So it's almost like a suspension bridge. You have your hands on one side, your feet on the other side, and your body is just bowing in order to hold you into this position. This is going to lessen the tension on your midsection, your core, and it's going to increase the tension in your neck and your shoulders and your wrists. Instead of pushing your hands up, you actually want to think about dragging your hands or pulling your hands backward. Or if you were on your forearms, pulling the skin of your forearms slightly backwards. They obviously shouldn't move, but you want to generate that internal tension in the lats and the there's a muscle called your serratus anterior, which one of my favorite muscles in the body. It's they call it the boxer's muscle. It's that feather-like muscle that's right above the rib cage, right where the rib cage is, and you have to have low body fat percentage in order to see it. But the muscles on the front and back side of your body, these are the ones that you really want to create tension with. This is going to help you activate your core significantly more. That subtle little change of pulling back rather than pushing forward, it's going to make this plank move significantly harder and work your core a lot more and protect your lower back as well. This is where I see those Guinness Book of World Record people, like, how do you hold yourself up for 8 hours? How do you activate a muscle for 8 hours? At that point, I feel like, I could be wrong here, maybe they have slowly generated the strength over time to do this, but I feel like at that point, when you're holding a plank for 8 hours, you're kind of just resting on your structure, your skeletal structure. You're kind of pinning yourself into this position and using that. I don't say he, but like the people that do this are pushing rather than pulling, because if you really do a plank correctly, you can make a 30-second plank feel so challenging. But if you just rest on your structure, maybe you could hold it for 7, 8, 9, 10 minutes. I've used to do plank challenges in group fitness, and I had someone hold a plank for, I think it was 45 of the 60 minutes. Insane. But at that point, I'm not sure how much muscular tension we're creating. A second thing that a lot of people do suboptimally in a plank is they tend to let their hips drop down. And this really does put a lot of pressure on the low back. And if you sit in the same position for hours and hours a day, your low back is losing its strength. The more years you spend in a seated position, the more your lower back is getting weak. It's not asking to support your core. That position that we need to avoid being in for long periods of time, the seated position, is the same position that kind of gives our core less structure and less strength. So we don't want to put load on the spine when we don't have the strength to be able to do that. So when you let your hips drop down, you're really putting load on the back. We want to make sure that that our ankles, our hips, our shoulders, they're all in one straight line. If I looked and drew a line from your shoulders, your ears, down to your hips, down to your ankles, it would be one straight line. I see a lot of people who want to stick their butt up and they create this mountain shape. And the whole reason you're doing this movement is to stabilize your core. And with your hips up, this is not allowing your core muscles to stabilize or strengthen or work. You're really kind of just cheating. You're putting it back into the shoulders. So when you're in a plank, squeeze your glutes. You want to tuck your tail, rotate your pelvis. If you had a tail, you're tucking your tail under so that your butt doesn't stick up. And warning, once you do fix your plank like this, you will most likely find that it actually feels so much harder. You will not be able to do it as long as if you did that old plank where you're pushing away and your hips are up in the air. If you're unable to do a plank right now in the way that I'm telling you, all you have to do is elevate your hands on a higher surface. So the same way that you would make a push-up easier, it's the same way that you would make a plank easier. Then as you build the strength, all you have to do is gradually decrease the angle to the regular plank with your hands or forearms on the ground, but start high on a countertop and then slowly lower to a chair and then maybe to a bench and then all the way down to the ground. Also, I have a YouTube video on my channel where you can see how to do a proper plank and a proper push-up. So let me know if you can't find that, but watch that video because it's a really, really good breakdown and you can actually see me going through the movements. Again, it's so important that you practice some form of planking every single day. Everything that you do stems from your core. The stronger your core, the better able you are to stabilize, the better you will feel when you're moving around in everyday life, the stronger your arms and legs are going to be. So number 3, the plank. Let's move on to number 4. Number 4 is the frog deadlift. The frog deadlift. This is the ability to have a nice wide sumo stance, squat your body all the way down, hips low, back flat, neutral spine, and then stand up picking something up. For a lot of people, this is This has become more of a flexibility issue than a strength issue. So we'll talk about that in just a second. But the first thing we want to talk about is good form. The frog deadlift. First, we want to have a nice wide stance with our toes turned slightly outward at about a 45-degree angle. This allows us to bring our body in between our legs, between our hips, and create space for us when we squat. This is the proper way that we want to pick stuff up off of the ground to make sure that we protect our lower back, which is why this move is really, really important, because we pick stuff off of the ground all the time. Okay, so turn the toes outward. Make sure your knees are going in the same direction as your toes. Don't let the knees cave in, because they're going to want to cave in. This is going to put a lot of pressure on your knees if you let them cave in. And then from there, we want to shift our weight onto our heels, rooting through the ball of the big toe joint. And then we initiate this movement by pushing the butt backwards like we're reaching for a chair. We're not going to bend down and reach for the ground from our lower back, but we're pushing the butt back. I like to try to say, how low can your hips go while keeping your chest tall and proud? You'll know you're doing this right if you feel like you're loading your butt, your glutes, your hamstrings. If you feel the stretch of your backside, the back of your legs, you know you're probably hitting this fairly correctly. Now from there, once we feel those back of the legs, the hamstrings start to get tight and stretched, then you can bend the knee while keeping the weight on your heels, squat down as low as you can go while keeping that back flat. And that's going to be your range of motion. As soon as that tailbone starts to tuck, or as soon as your back starts to round, you know that that is your range of motion, and you need to work on strengthening in that range of motion, but also trying to get better, improved mobility and get lower by using some of the tips that we've gone over in the squat or the lunge or here. How do we practice the frog deadlift? We practice in the range of motion that we've earned. And an easy way to do this is just to use your body weight or assist with a TRX or the back of a chair, and then track your progress. Monitor where you're at. Maybe the first couple weeks you can only get to your kneecaps with your hands, and then you can get to your mid shins, and then you can go all the way down and you can touch the floor. Make sure that you're measuring where you're at, and then make sure you work on your mobility in order to get down into that position. You're going to work on your hip mobility, like the 90-90 position, like the runner's lunge position, like the psoas stretch position. I have a ton of videos that you can watch to find these. Also, work on your ankle mobility, the combat stretch. If you YouTube combat stretch, super important. Most people lack ankle mobility because of the way that we live, and we lose the ability for us to have strength by pointing our toes, which is super important for things like jumping and sprinting, which we lose as we get older. And just like all the other moves that we've talked about so far, your goal is to practice this move every single day. Every time you go to pick something up, it's a great opportunity for you to practice this frog deadlift. No matter how light or how heavy, practice, practice, practice. If you practice it in a more mindful way and you move more mindfully, your body will love you for it. You will strengthen the muscles that need to be strengthened for you to live a long, healthy, independent life. Okay, so number 4 is the frog deadlift. Let's talk about the last and final move. I love this move. It is a challenge. I'm not going to lie. A lot of people that I coach cannot do this move. The last move is called a tabletop. This is a fantastic move for maintaining your shoulder flexibility, improving your posture, strengthening your glutes, as well as working on your entire posterior chain, which is the back side of your body. And these are the muscles that we are seeing all throughout our society as being weak, undertrained, and it causes a lot of problems in people's later years. And even not in their later years. I see it in people in their 30s and 40s. So to do a tabletop exercise, you want to start by just sitting down on the floor. Your knees are bent and your feet are flat. Take your feet about hip width apart. Now, place your hands behind you. Your hands are about shoulder width apart or maybe a little bit wider, and your fingers can be pointing towards your feet. Your fingers can be pointing out to the sides. Your fingers can be pointing back behind you. Whatever you think that you can get, eventually you want to try to get your fingers pointing towards your feet. This does require wrist, elbow, shoulder mobility. But once you get your hands on the ground behind you, next you want to press your hands and your feet into the floor, and you want to lift your hips off the ground, creating this little tabletop position with your body. Your knees should be directly above your ankles forming a 90-degree angle, and your arms should be straight. Most people that do this, they do not have the ability to open up their chest like that and stretch their shoulders back like that. A lot of people that I train don't even have the strength in their wrists to be able to do just this simple body weight movement. And that comes from just not having enough load on our wrists. We don't carry things anymore like we used to. We don't get off the ground like we used to. We don't support weight with our wrists anymore like we used to. We just have it in this nice little flex position, tapping on a keyboard or thumbs typing away on a phone screen. So next, after you press your hands and your feet into the floor, you lift your hips off the ground. Now you want to engage the core muscles, squeezing the booty, keeping your body stable, and avoid sagging in the hips. I tell people all the time, if my car was a Honda Accord and I'm trying to drive over this bridge that you're creating, I wouldn't get stuck in your belly button or in the crease of your hips. Engage your core muscles, keep the hips up, hold this position for a few seconds. It's not easy. Then gently lower your hips back down to the ground. That's rep 1. Repeat the exercise for whatever the desired number of repetitions are and hold that tabletop position for a set amount of time and challenge yourself to try to get more and more as you go. Once it becomes easy with your body weight, you can start to put weight on your hips. You could put like a medicine ball on your hips. You could put a sandbag on your hips. You could put a backpack full of, canned goods on your hips, whatever you want to do there. Repeat it until you can do it easily, and then strengthen it and strengthen it. Remember to breathe steadily throughout the exercise and maintain proper form to avoid any strain in the neck or any injury in the shoulders. Move slow and move mindfully. And let's talk about, a lot of people can't even begin to lift their hips all the way up off the floor to where their knees get to 90 degrees. So just like the frog deadlift, just like the other things that we have talked about, you want to make sure that you meet yourself where you're at, find that level you can do. A lot of times it's people's flexibility that don't allow them to do this. So practice by just going halfway up. And then once you get good at that, you can try to get a little bit more and go 3/4 of the range of motion. It does help for you to really pull your shoulder blades back and down and make sure that your shoulders stay away from your ears. You got to avoid shrugging those shoulders up because that's going to create that tension in the neck and the traps. This will be most people's first tendency when they do this exercise. If I don't cue at all and I tell them just to do it, that's what most people do, is they bring their shoulders up towards their ears. Then you're going to drive and pull your heels down into the ground like you're going to be doing a hamstring curl. So a lot of people, they lack hamstring strength, so they'll try to get away from this and they'll try to push their weight up into their toes, and that's going to have their front of their thighs, their quads working a little bit more. But really, when you do this, feet on the ground, hands behind you, you start to lift your hips up. Think about driving your heels down into the floor, like you're trying to curl your feet into you. Now, obviously, because the floor is there, it's not going to move, but when you curl your heels into you, you are using your hamstrings. You are strengthening some of the weaker muscles on your body. That is what we're looking to do. Wherever you are, hold the position for 30 to 60 seconds. And then every time you practice this move, think about trying to just get a little higher. Hold it for just a little bit longer. I just absolutely love this move because it helps to strengthen the back of your legs, which we have a hard time doing. It also is one of the better things you can do for shoulder health. I talk all the time about dead hangs and how that's so good for your shoulders. Well, this is a really, really great option if you're not strong enough to get your dead hang. And even if you are strong enough to get your dead hang, this is great because your arms are back behind you. Just like hip extension in a lunge, this is shoulder extension. So we need more extension in our lives. Let's normalize extension. I am with Kelly Starrett on this one. Now, if this movement is way too hard for you and you can't even begin to lift your hips up, or maybe you find it just too painful to put pressure on your hands and your wrists, which I see a lot of the time, then there's an easier version for you to do, and it's a little bit simpler and requires a little less strength. So now go sit in a chair. You're going to scoot all the way to the edge of your chair. You're going to bring your feet a little bit farther out in front of you. You're going to place your hands on the side of the chair. Once you do that, you are going to start to lift your hips off the ground. And now you're doing a elevated assisted tabletop. Once you get strong at that, you can lower the object that you're sitting on and eventually make your way down to the floor before you start loading it up. This move is so important if you want to have good posture, if you want to maintain healthy shoulders, if you want to have strong, capable wrists. So like all the other moves we talked about today, every single day, practice it every single day. Be mindful of how you move and your body will love you for it. There you have it, the 5 moves that you never want to lose. Please practice these moves every single day. We got the sit to stand, the lunge, we got the plank, the frog deadlift, and we have the tabletop. As we wrap up today's episode on the 5 moves you never want to lose, remember that movement is not just about fitness, it's about reclaiming independence when it comes to moving your body, not counting on anyone else to take care of us when we get older. Empowering yourself to live a life to the fullest. By incorporating these fundamental movements into your daily routine, you're not just building strength and flexibility, you're investing in your long-term health and well-being. Remember, our bodies are designed to move in all directions, so don't neglect any range of motion. If you can't, you must. If you can't, you must. Find the things that you struggle with, meet yourself where you're at, slowly practice every day, frequency is king, and then progress over time. Always keep rule number 2 in mind. If you don't use it, you will lose it. So let's commit to moving our bodies in a way that honors their natural design, strengthens our muscles, and enhances our overall quality of life. Together, let's embrace the power of movement and thrive in every aspect of our lives. And that's it, my friends. Thank you so much for joining me on this Training Tuesday episode of the Livin the Dream podcast. Share the knowledge that you gained with your friends and family and hold each other accountable. If you enjoy this content, it really does help a ton. It's a non-cost way to support this podcast. If you could post on your social media stories a screenshot of this episode with one takeaway that you learned, and make sure that you tag me and share your journey. Tag me at livingthedream_podcast or at Coach Damian SD and let us know how this episode benefited you. Also, if you could leave a review on whatever platform you're listening to this on, that helps a ton. Thank you so much. Let us know what we missed. Let us know what we got wrong. Tell us how you practice moving your body the way that we were designed to move. We want to know. Message us if you have any suggestions or tips that would help your Livin the Dream team that we can discuss on future episodes. I will be right here with you, working on making us stronger, happier, and healthier humans. Until next time, friends, keep living the dream.